When his secretary got pregnant, they practically celebrated, offering me $2 million cash to sign the divorce papers on the spot and disappear forever. My lawyer begged me to fight for my dignity, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at my husband, smiled, and signed the papers. His family sneered, believing they had bought my silence and secured their massive business empire. But as I walked out of that suffocating boardroom, I slid a single sealed envelope across the table. They thought they were paying me to walk away empty-handed. They didn't know that the envelope contained a secret that would instantly reduce their entire legacy to absolute ruins. So I can see how far my voice has reached. My name is Catherine, and at 32 years old, I finally learned what it means to step out of a golden cage. For 7 years, I was married to Julian Vance, the handsome, charismatic heir to Vance Logistics. To the outside world, I was the luckiest woman alive. But inside the walls of the Vance family estate, I was nothing more than an uninvited guest. Julian's mother, Eleanor, made sure I felt that distinction every single day. To her, I was a middle-class outsider, a girl from a simple background who had somehow tricked her golden boy and crawled her way into their prestigious bloodline. She looked at me not as a daughter-in-law, but as an annoying stain on their perfect family crest. What Eleanor and Julian never wanted to admit, however, was that their empire was built on my quiet, exhausting labor. While Julian played the brilliant, forward-thinking CEO at public events and high-profile luncheons, I was the one sitting in the home office until 2 in the morning. I managed the complex back-end administrative structures, kept their legal compliance absolutely flawless, and resolved massive operational nightmares before they could ever go public. Julian took all the credit, strutting around like a self-made titan, while I stayed in the shadows, keeping his crown polished. I did it gladly, believing that my sacrifice was really believed that my silent loyalty would eventually buy me a place in their hearts. How incredibly foolish I was. The illusion of my perfect marriage didn't just fade. It shattered into a million pieces on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was looking for a signed shipping contract in Julian's leather briefcase when my fingers brushed against a medical folder. It wasn't our usual family clinic stationery. Inside was an ultrasound and a laboratory report for Chloe, Julian's young secretary. She was 10 weeks pregnant. The father's name was listed clearly, Julian Vance. My breath caught in my throat, a cold, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. When Julian came home, I confronted him, holding the papers with trembling hands. I expected tears, an apology, or some desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, he just laughed, a dry, dismissive sound that made my blood run cold. Before I could even speak, Eleanor stepped into the room, her eyes gleaming with a strange, predatory triumph. She didn't reprimand her son. Instead, she stood beside him like a shield, looking down her nose at me. "Let's not make a scene, Catherine," she said, her voice dripping with icy satisfaction. "Chloe is carrying a Vance. A true heir must be born from our own kind, not someone of your mediocre stock. Your time here is officially over." In that single, agonizing moment, the man I had loved for 7 long years didn't even look at me. He just nodded in silent agreement, completely discarding me like a piece of worthless office trash, without showing a single shred of genuine personal human remorse left. 2 days later, I was summoned to the gleaming, high-rise corporate headquarters of Vance Logistics. Entering the grand executive boardroom felt like walking directly into an ambush. Julian and Eleanor sat at the end of the massive mahogany table, flanked by a team of ruthless, high-priced corporate attorneys. Standing beside me was my own lawyer, Arthur, who looked incredibly tense. Eleanor didn't waste any time on polite pleasantries. Her attorney slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished table, topped with a glittering, certified check. "Sign the divorce papers and the non-disclosure agreement right now, Catherine," Eleanor demanded, her voice like cracking ice. "In exchange, you will receive exactly $2 million cash. You can walk away quietly, buy yourself a nice little life, and disappear." Before I could even reach for the papers, their attorney leaned forward, his smile sharp and predatory. If you refuse, we will tie you up in court for years. We will drag your name through the mud, bankrupt you with legal fees, and ensure you leave with absolutely nothing. This is your only offer." My lawyer, Arthur, gasped and immediately leaned down, whispering urgently into my ear, "Catherine, do not sign this. It's a trap. They are terrified of a public trial. If we fight them in court, we can expose their greed and easily win 5 times this amount. Please, let me fight for you." I silently stared at the physical check, then directly at Julian's cold, completely indifferent face now. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the heavy silence of the boardroom stretch to its absolute limit. I looked Arthur in the eye, gave him a small nod, and turned to Julian. He couldn't even look back at me, his eyes glued to the table as if he were suddenly ashamed, though we both knew he was just a coward. I picked up the heavy gold pen, unscrewed the cap with deliberate precision, and signed my name on the dotted line. I didn't hesitate or cry. Eleanor let out a sharp, triumphant breath, a cold, mocking sneer plastering itself across her heavily powdered face. She believed she had officially won. In her mind, she had bought my silence and my 7 years of devotion for a couple of $1 million. It was a mere drop in the bucket for the Vance empire. I picked up the certified check and slid it safely into my purse. Then, I reached back into my bag and pulled out a thick, heavy, wax-sealed envelope. I slid it gently across the polished mahogany table, letting it stop right in front of Julian's hands. "What is this?" Eleanor hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Consider it my parting gift," I said, offering them a calm, mysterious smile that made Julian shift uncomfortably in his seat. "But you must promise me one thing. Open this envelope only when I have fully left the building." Without waiting for an answer, I stood up and walked out with absolute grace. As the elevator doors closed behind me, the atmosphere inside the grand corporate boardroom shifted from arrogant triumph to suffocating tension. Julian's hand shook slightly as he picked up the thick envelope. Eleanor rolled her eyes, muttering that it was probably just a pathetic love letter. But their attorney, sensing something entirely different, took the envelope, pulled out a silver letter opener, and sliced it open. The first document he pulled out was a certified medical dossier from a highly reputable clinic. The lawyer's eyes widened, and the color instantly drained from his face as his gaze darted between the paper and Julian. "What is it?" Eleanor demanded, her voice sharp. The attorney swallowed hard before reading the document aloud. It was a conclusive diagnostic report proving Julian had been diagnosed with permanent infertility years ago following a severe childhood illness. He was entirely incapable of having biological children. The entire room went dead silent. Chloe's baby was not a Vance heir. The realization that they had been completely played by a scheming secretary hit Julian like a physical blow. But the horror was far from over. The attorney pulled out the second document, and his hands began to tremble. It was the original proprietary software license for the custom routing system that keeps Vance Logistics operational. The entire digital infrastructure of their company was registered solely under my maiden name, a proprietary system I had inherited from my late father. By rushing me to sign the divorce and executing the immediate confidentiality agreement, they had legally terminated my spousal clause. In doing so, they had instantly revoked their company's right to use my software. Without my custom software, their entire massive corporate logistics fleet and delivery network was instantly, completely, and legally shut down without any further warning tonight. I stepped out of the sleek corporate lobby and into the warm afternoon air, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of 7 years lift from my shoulders. Just as I reached my car, my phone began to vibrate violently. I glanced at the screen. It was Julian. I let it ring. 2 seconds after it cut out, it started vibrating again, this time with Eleanor's name flashing across the screen. They had opened the envelope. Later, Arthur told me exactly what happened after the doors closed. The boardroom had descended into complete and utter chaos. Julian's face had drained of all color as he stared at his own medical diagnosis of permanent infertility, his eyes slowly turning toward Chloe, whose elaborate web of lies collapsed instantly under his gaze. She had started sobbing, confessing that the baby actually belonged to Julian's former best friend, a betrayal that cut Julian to his very core. But before they could even process the personal humiliation, their corporate attorneys realized the second, far more devastating blow. The digital tracking and routing servers of Vance Logistics were shutting down one by one. Without my software, their delivery trucks were blind, their automated warehouse systems were entirely frozen, and they were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars with every passing minute. My phone was practically melting in my hand. Frantic, groveling text messages poured in. Julian begged me to pick up, writing that we could talk this through like family. Eleanor sent a string of desperate texts, promising to double my settlement if I just turned the servers back on. I calmly set my phone to silent, slid it into my purse, and walked into a quiet, beautiful cafe down the street, ready to enjoy my very first calm lunch as a free, wealthy, independent new woman. 3 months later, the proud Vance Logistics empire had completely collapsed, filing for a humiliating public bankruptcy. Without the rights to my custom routing software, they couldn't fulfill their shipping contracts, and the resulting legal penalties stripped them of everything they had left. Once the truth about her lies came out, Chloe quickly vanished into thin air, taking what remained of Julian's personal savings along with his former best friend, leaving Julian entirely alone and utterly ruined. Meanwhile, I used my $2 million and the exclusive rights to my software to launch my own independent logistics firm. Today, my business is thriving, and I am finally living a peaceful, happy life entirely on my own terms, free from their toxic control. Looking back, I realized that their overwhelming greed was the very thing that set me free. They thought they could buy my silence, but they only bought their own destruction. Now, I am incredibly curious about those of you who have stayed to listen to my story until the very end. If you had found yourself standing in my exact shoes that day, would you have taken the clean $2 million and walked away like I did? Or would you have rejected their money to drag them through a long, public court battle instead?